This is an aircraft carrier-born submarine hunter, dressed up like a firefighter. Its story is one of Cold War posturing, coastal policing, and aerial firefighting. Quite the career for such an unassuming-looking aircraft. It was the de Havilland Canada CP-121 Tracker, an icon of Canadian aviation for almost 30 years. The remarkable story of the Tracker starts in the early 1950s with the Royal Canadian Navy's acquisition of a new aircraft carrier, HMCS Bonaventure. Canada had been operating aircraft carriers since the Second World War. Post-war, the focus of the carriers was anti-submarine warfare. As such, HMCS Magnificent, the previous carrier, which was on loan from the Royal Navy, was equipped with the Grumman Avenger AS-3 starting in 1950. These were modified versions of a World War II torpedo bomber. While somewhat capable, it failed to provide both attack capability as well as detection and tracking. Later variants would have magnetic anomaly detection booms or search radars. These flew in teams of two, one to track and the other to attack. While workable in the short term, it was clearly not ideal. With the limited space available on a carrier, dedicating 2 aircraft per mission effectively half the fleet. For their new flagship, nicknamed the Bonnie, the RCN brass wanted the very best equipment available. This meant the old Avenger teams would need to be replaced with a more modern sub-hunter. They wanted a single aircraft capable of both detecting and attacking submarines in all weather. Just a quick reminder that small channels like mine need your support. Please subscribe, like the video, and leave a comment. This will help convince the YouTube algorithms to recommend my videos and grow the channel. Given the size of the Bonnie, there were really only 2 suitable aircraft on the market, the Grumman S2 Tracker and the Ferry Gannet. Both were new designs that featured hunter-killer capability and were compact enough to fit in the Bonnie's comparatively small hangar space. The Gannet was a British design from Ferry Aviation. Widely considered to be one of the ugliest aircraft ever produced, although I beg to differ, its bulbous shape incorporated numerous ingenious design features that made it an outstanding naval ASW platform. These included twin engines supporting counter-rotating props and a 2-piece folding wing system. Although loved by the British, Australians, Germans, and Indonesians who flew them, it wasn't considered a good fit for Canada's needs and so was passed over. This left the Grumman S2 Tracker as the only viable aircraft capable of filling the intended role, as well as fitting into the carrier. Luckily for Canada, the Tracker had been designed to an American specification for a sub-hunter capable of serving on the U.S. Navy's Essex-class aircraft carriers. These were approximately the same size as the Bonnie. With the airframe selected, it was now time to figure out how to equip it. At the same time the Trackers were being considered, the RCN was developing their highly advanced Conair CL-28 Argus. The Argus would operate from land bases while the Trackers would operate from the carrier. It was intended that the 2 aircraft share similar equipment. This would ensure that both were at the cutting edge of technology and would help streamline crew training. The RCN wanted 100 aircraft and set a budget of $100 million, or $1.1 billion in 2024 money. This made it the largest defense contract in Canada since the Second World War. Discussions began with Grumman, and Canadian officials soon secured a licensed production agreement, plans, and production jigs, plus 1 operational pattern aircraft. The Department of Defense Production distributed construction of the various components to various companies from Manitoba to Nova Scotia. De Havilland Aircraft of Canada Limited was selected as the prime contractor, and final assembly would take place at their facility in Downsview, Ontario. This agreement ensured that most of the $100 million would be spent in Canada in support of the Canadian aviation industry. Contracts were signed in April 1954 and work quickly got underway. On May 31, 1956, the first Canadian-built Tracker took flight. The RCN's official designation was initially the CS2F-1 Tracker. The crew consisted of 2 pilots and 2 ASW system operators who sat facing forward in a loud, dark compartment behind the pilots. Although this sounds bleak, it allowed the operators to better operate and interpret the aircraft's electronic systems. The Tracker was 13.3 meters long, 5.3 meters tall, and had a wingspan of 22 meters. However, this was reduced to only 8.2 meters when the wings were folded. It weighed 8,300 kilograms empty and had a max takeoff weight of 11,860 kilograms. Two extremely noisy 1,125 horsepower Wright R182082WA 9-cylinder air-cooled radial engines were mounted in the wing nacelles. These nacelles also included the landing gear and rear-firing sonobuoy launchers. In the event of a single engine failure, the aircraft could be safely flown and landed thanks to the Sarah system. This system combined the rudder and trim tabs to produce a sweep of 40 degrees to each side. The Tracker wasn't a fast plane. It patrolled at only 240 kilometers per hour, but its large wings and engines meant it was very maneuverable at low level. The cockpit also had large windows, allowing fantastic visibility for the pilots. Externally, it looked almost exactly like its American brother, save for a few antennas. It had a large bomb bay capable of carrying 2 homing torpedoes, or depth charges, or some combination thereof. This was supplemented by underwing hardpoints, which could carry rocket pods in addition to more torpedoes or depth charges. The Tracker was also capable of carrying a single Mark 101 Lulu, Mark 57 or Mark 105 hot-point nuclear weapon. Although this was tested, it was not deployed. A retractable dustbin on the aircraft's belly contained an APN-59 surface search radar. An ASQ-8 magnetic anomaly detector was housed in a retractable tailboom. This was the same model that equipped the larger Argus. Other notable external features were the UPD-501 radar emissions detector and electronic countermeasures antenna, plus it had a 70 million candle power steerable searchlight mounted on one wing. In addition to the equipment necessary to run the radar, magnetic anomaly detector, ECM systems, and radar emission detectors, the Tracker carried a Canadian system, Julie. This was an advanced sonar system it shared in common with the Argus. To use it, they would first deploy an array of sonobuoys. Then practice depth charges would be dropped in a pattern. Large shock waves caused by these explosions would echo off underwater objects. Their location and heading were determined by comparing the arrival times of the various sonobuoys plus their Doppler shift. Submarines, whales, and large schools of fish all look the same to sonar, so final confirmation of the presence of the sub was done with the magnetic anomaly detector. Metal objects have a measurable effect on the Earth's magnetic field. Whales and fish do not. In times of war, the sub could then be attacked with torpedoes. The first Trackers made their way to squadron service starting in October 13, 1956. They first entered service with Test and Evaluation Squadron VX-10. This was followed by the delivery to the operational ASW squadrons, first to VS-881 in February 7, 1957, and then VS-880 in October 1957. During this time, HMCS Bonaventure was commissioned in Belfast. 4 Trackers and 2 Banshees were flown over to Northern Ireland to take part in carrier landing trials. Once completed, the ship began its voyage across the ocean, arriving in Halifax on the 24th of June 1957. Both squadrons operated on the Bonnie until VS-881 was merged with VS-880 in July of 1959. With that, VS-880 operated a total of 24 Trackers. All the Trackers were based at HMCS Shearwater, when not aboard the Bonnie, except for a couple who were stationed out on the left-hand coast in Patricia Bay in BC. 42 CS2F-1s were built. The remaining 57 aircraft in the contract were built to the CS2F-2 specification. This improved variant included new tactical navigation equipment, a new longer-range search radar, an improved magnetic anomaly detector, and minor airframe modifications. The Dash 2s were also now able to partially use another piece of Canadian ASW technology, Jezebel. This was a passive low-frequency acoustic sonar system that complemented the active Julie system. It took data from up to 16 sonobuoys and graphed the results such that operators were able to locate and identify targets using their acoustic signatures. These tracks would be followed up with the Julie system or the magnetic anomaly detector. I said partially used because the Dash 2s only carried a Jezebel signal relay system. This sent the sonobuoy data either to an Argus, a ship, or a land base for processing instead of doing it on board themselves. The improved CS2F-1 Trackers entered squadron service, displacing the Dash 1 models. Almost as soon as they entered service, plans were being made to upgrade the fleet again. A couple Dash 1s served as test beds before the full Dash 3 upgrades began in 1965. The CS2F-3 was the furthest refinement of the Tracker. It included the full onboard Jezebel system, including recording and processing functions, as well as an AN-501 tactical navigation computer and a Marconi AN-503 Doppler radar. It also included the Anti-Submarine warfare tactical navigation system, which combined all available data into a map and track displayed to the pilots. This advanced system allowed the aircraft to better navigate over the open ocean. This system, as well as Julian Jezebel, were also found on the CP-107 Argus. 45 would be converted by Ferry Aviation, with the first conversion being delivered in July of 1966 and the last in April of 1968. That same year brought the unification of the Canadian Armed Forces, and this precipitated a name change from CS2F to the more familiar CP-121 Tracker. Unification also changed defense priorities, and in 1970, HMCS Bonaventure was paid off and the Trackers were left to operate from shore bases. It should be obvious to anyone at this point that, even before the budget cuts and given a squadron size of 24, the original order of 100 aircraft seems to be far in excess of the actual needs of the RCN. Let's break down the entire fleet and see where everything went up to the Bonnie's retirement. As stated previously, the first Tracker came from Grumman. The next 32 were built by de Havilland to the Mark I specification, and the following 67 were built as Mark IIs. This totals 100 airframes acquired by October 1960. In 1960, 17 CS2F-1 Trackers were fixed up and given to the Netherlands. 15 Trackers crashed between 1957 and 1970. This left 12 as training airframes and 14 held as spares as of 1970. Of the remaining Mark IIs, 42 were upgraded to the Mark III standard. At their peak, there were approximately 60 Trackers flying in Canadian squadrons. These were distributed between VS-880 and VS-881 in Shearwater, VU-33 in Patricia Bay, VU-32, and VX-10. Up to the Bonnie's retirement, this was considered appropriate, but now things look different. The Trackers were forced to change roles, from deepwater ASW work to shallow water work because of their limited range. This work was also being carried out by the disembarked Sea King helicopter fleet, with which they shared a common base. The Tracker fleet was simply too large and expensive for the needs of the Canadian Armed Forces. In the early 1970s, some Trackers began being withdrawn from military service to begin their second life as aerial firefighters. The Ontario provincial government was the first to take delivery of a surplus Tracker. They had been working with the RCN through the late 1960s to develop the Tracker into a water bomber. The Tracker was well suited to this role by having a large weapons bay and good low-speed maneuverability. 3,600-liter fire-retardant tanks with 4 doors were installed by Toronto's Field Aviation in the bomb bay, and all necessary military equipment was removed. The Ontario Department of Lands and Forests, later the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources, contracted Kenting Aviation, also of Toronto, to conduct the first year of operations. After that, the ministry would handle it on their own. By 1973, there were 6 in service, but things were not going well. Their role as a first attack aircraft carrying fire retardant instead of water was misunderstood, and so they were not being used effectively. In addition to this, the Tracker's retardant tanks were problematic for ground crews, and corrosion was found inside the wings, leading to higher operational costs than expected. This, in addition to the perceived high cost of fire retardant, motivated the OMNR to prefer a fleet of water-scooping Twin Otters over the Trackers. The program began to be phased out in 1977 and was completely shut down by 1979. Saskatchewan followed Ontario's lead and obtained 7 Trackers from the RCN for their own firefighting program starting in 1975. Their Trackers were upgraded to a similar standard to the Ontario Trackers. Although aware of the problems Ontario was facing, They managed to use their trackers much more successfully, and they became a fundamental component of that province's firefighting capabilities for over 20 years. Previous problems with maintenance and tank doors not opening correctly were solved after years of effort. The 1970s also brought changes on the military side. Beginning in December 1973, but not becoming official until 1977, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea changed the rules about national sovereignty around coastlines. In Canada's case, this meant monitoring another 5.6 million square kilometers of ocean, in addition to existing territorial waters. The RCN's trackers were modified to the Marine Reconnaissance version, with a new radar, communications equipment, and the ability to carry up to 36 CRV-7 rockets in 6 pods beneath the wings. These upgrades were completed by 1982 and gave the trackers the ability to effectively track and attack surface targets. By this point, the trackers were getting old, and their role was being replaced by other aircraft like the CP-140 Aurora. All trackers serving with the Canadian Armed Forces were retired by January 1991. There were now dozens of surplus trackers, engines, and other parts up for grabs. The Conair company in Abbotsford, British Columbia knew a good thing when they saw it and bought 45 of them. These were modified to the Firecat standard by first removing all unnecessary equipment, resulting in weight savings of 1,500 kilograms. Then a 3,300-liter tank was installed in the bomb bay. This also necessitated raising the cabin floor by 20 centimeters. The Firecats were operated by Conair and contracted out to various governments and agencies starting around 1979. The biggest customer of the Firecat was France. Their Sécurité Civile bought 19 between 1981 and 1987. The French loved it and upgraded their entire fleet to the Turbo Firecat standard. This involved replacing the noisy piston engines with modern Pratt & Whitney Canada PT6A67AF turboprops. The turboprop conversion idea actually goes back to the RCN. They successfully experimented with putting turboprops on the trackers, but the improvements gained were considered insufficient for the expense, and so the plan was abandoned. Conair, on the other hand, did see its potential. It would extend the lifetime of their fleet and simplify maintenance of these aging beauties. The old radial engines were long out of production, and finding spare parts was becoming increasingly difficult. A handful of aircraft were converted for service in Canada and the US, but as I said, France converted their entire fleet. I guess the cost calculus is a little different over there. Canada retired their types in 2012, and France followed with their Turbo Firecats in 2020. All of the Canadian-built trackers have now been retired, but a single American-built tracker is still operational with the Argentine Navy. Wild stuff.